STEM outreach program in the Cooperunion School of Engineering, right across the street at 41 Cooper. And it's really fun to be back on stage tonight. Last time I was here was during our summer STEM program when 225 high school students stood on this stage and presented their work that they had done on engineering and problem solving. It was those same students that we turned to design this program. We asked high school students, what do you want to know about the future? What do you want to know about engineering, about technology? And they resoundingly said, artificial intelligence. So we're engineers, we design things, we went back to them for inspiration, and we asked those same students, what about artificial intelligence do you want to know? And so the questions that you hear tonight are inspired by the questions of New York City high school and middle school students. This panel is also special tonight because it's an all-female panel in honor of Women's History Month. That's really awesome, right? Yeah. And I began my life as a neuroscientist, so this program is also in honor of Brain Awareness Week, a global partnership between scientists and the public to increase understanding of the brain and how humans use it. So kudos to Brain Awareness Week. Great Hall has always been a place to talk about really important issues, and one issue that is growing for us is this issue of artificial intelligence, and particularly artificial intelligence literacy and education surrounding it. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Tara Chklovski, the founder of Technovation, a pioneer in engineering and technology education, who with her team recently launched a global artificial intelligence family challenge. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about artificial intelligence education.
Thank you for coming. We all braved the rain to get here. So, my organization is really about empowering each one of us to understand that we have a role to play in the world and that each of us can make a difference. So, a big part of what we do is to inspire people, especially young people, to understand that with AI, it's like a mirror to our souls and to what makes us more human. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what we've been doing, but also perhaps inspire you to think about what role you can play as technology is changing the world around us. So currently there's a term that's floating around that's saying that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. And this is not something that is new to us as a society. And the thing that is unusual is the pace of change. And I think we can all remember how quickly mobile phones, smartphones came and took over. And I think I, for one, feel very, very breathless with all the new changes that we see around us. And even if you sort of see about the conversation around AI and how quickly it is changing on a day-to-day basis. And what I want to say is that there's a lot of good that comes with this kind of change and can be measured very, very quantitatively in economic terms. And so here are some interesting graphs of how the world changed because of the first industrial revolution. So there's a thing known as the Malthusian trap, and it says that for thousands and thousands of years, people across the world were really stuck in poverty because they were not able to make enough food to be able to grow their populations. And then with the introduction of mechanization, the Industrial Revolution, there was a huge jump in what we could do, what kinds of food we could produce, and we could actually grow as a society. But what that also meant is that it's also the period where it's called the Great Divergence, where some countries really pulled ahead out of, in comparison to other countries. And that's something that I want to bring attention to you, that there's a role for us to play in trying to prevent some of these inequalities, and to be very mindful of how technology can not only bring out the best in us, but also sometimes what makes us human and all our human fallibilities can also be amplified. So I wanted to play a quick video for you, just to sort of give you a sense of what people are saying about these changes. I'll skip it. That video is from the World Economic Forum, so if you're curious, you can take a look at it. So here are some of the very quantitative ways in which, and the change that is happening and at the scale at which it's happening, and all of this is important to those of you who are in high school, who are in college, and kind of thinking about what are some ways to make a change in the world. And if you take a look at, this is sort of an estimation of the fourth industrial revolution, or what impact AI technology is going to have on our economy, and where are some of these conversations happening. And also, if you take a look at how many, what kinds of changes are happening in research, how many new courses are being introduced, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about this from some of the panelists today as well. So all this to show that change is happening very, very, very fast, but I don't want that to be a negative message. And what I want to show is that now each of us we have the ability to affect the way these technologies are going. And I want to give you some concrete examples of that. So I did want to sort of, before I show you the examples, I did want to show you some of these two quotes that I really think are interesting. Lately, there have been a lot of discussions around ethics and how there's bias in a lot of these tools and technologies. But I want to re-emphasize that these tools and technologies are really just amplifying what makes us human. And so we kind of want these machines and these tools to be better than us. And so then we say, oh, AI can be very biased, but it's because we, the engineers, didn't think about some of those corner cases and some of those other things that we should be thinking about, and then we get very angry when it kind of tells us the truth. And it's an ugly truth. This one I kind of like. The computer has it in for me. I wish that they would sell it. It never does just what I want, but only what I tell it. So, I mentioned that I run an organization. It's an engineering and technology education nonprofit, and we empower communities, children and adults, to find problems that they care about and to actually use the tools of the time to solve them. So 10 years ago, it was mobile apps, and now it's AI. And I want to share some examples from young students from all around the world. So my favorite one is this one from Bolivia, where a team of teenage girls, so it's a mountainous community 4 hours away from La Paz, which is the capital. And when a mentor came to this community to inspire these girls to participate in technovation, they were a little bit surprised as to why they would want to create an app that they could sell. And the reason is that the community actually doesn't use money, they barter. But the interesting thing is that they do have smartphones. And so they created an app where you could scan a QR code, and they printed the QR code and put it on rocks everywhere in their area because people walk. And you could scan the QR code and you could learn how to code. You could also learn their language, which is one of the sort of fast disappearing languages, and you could learn some basic math. And it was just such a powerful example of how technology can be used to address a local problem. I'll share another one. This is an AI-based technology that a family in Spain created, where they wanted to monitor public pools, and the AI agent could actually keep track of who's underwater, and they trained the model to look for people who may be showing signs of drowning. There's another one from a girl in Palestine that actually trained an AI image recognition model to look at children's drawings and to reliably predict when the child was feeling sad and showed evidence of violence at home. And so then the model could alert the psychologist at the school or the counselor to try to see if the child needed any help. So over the past 13 years, we have worked with about 120,000 children, youth, parents, grandparents, really sort of giving them the message that we need you. We need your ideas, don't be afraid. These tools are not hard to learn. You just have to Google, how do I do this, and you'll be able to figure it out. And it's incredibly powerful when our voices are heard and they are made part of the engineering design process, because that's the way we're going to come up with better technologies. And so I just wanted to leave you with this. This is a really cool tool, and it's from Design for America, and if you wanted to search for it, but it gives you a sense for how you wanted to find problems that could be meaningful and could have a big impact, because each of us have the ability to make a change in the world. So, thank you. And now I wanted to introduce our panelists. Alexandra Cohen is going to come up. Susan Epstein. Karen Palmer. And Jennifer Strong. Oh, okay, all right. Welcome, and if you want to take a seat and maybe introduce yourself.
Great, so thank you for that introduction, Tara. My name is Alexandra Cohen, and I'm a developmental cognitive neuroscientist at NYU. So what does that actually mean? Most of the time I spend is in front of the computer, coding, doing data analysis, reading a lot, and often planning experiments that I hope will go perfectly, but often I make mistakes and have to figure out how to fix them and hit roadblocks. And when I'm not doing that, I'm writing up and synthesizing data and preparing to present it to the scientific community so that we can hopefully come together and think about the different broader impacts of the work that we're doing. So along those lines, I'm part of the Scientist Action and Advocacy Network at NYU, and we aim to think about ways that science can inform policy, such as when we're raising the age of criminal responsibility. In my spare time, I like to try and bring science to the community, so I've co-chaired Brain Awareness Week for New York City for the past several years, trying to bring science to various kids in New York City. One of the main tools us developmental cognitive neuroscientists use to study the brain is MRI, which is basically a giant magnet that allows us to take pictures of the brain. We can take pictures of brain structure, so the different parts of the brain and the connections between them. And we can also take pictures of brain function, so while the brain is engaged in a specific task or while the participant is at rest in the scanner, and looked at brain activity during those different time points. Now, I specifically study how emotions influence learning and memory, and one important tool that we often use is mathematical models to help us understand different calculations that the brain might be performing when we think or make decisions that contribute to learning. So this is just a paper that I co-wrote on this topic for Frontiers for Young Minds, which is a journal for kids and teens, edited by kids and teens. So I highly recommend you look at this journal if you get the chance. In these simple learning models, there are many ways that, we use these simple learning models, but there are many other ways that technology is used in my field, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of them right now. So Dr. Anna Shapiro at UPenn built models of memory-related brain structures using what we know about biology to try and identify what different pathways might support different learning and memory processes. Dr. Liu Chang at Dartmouth aims to decode emotional states, looking at moment-to-moment fluctuations in brain activity and also in reading emotion in the face. Dr. Erin Heller at Miami uses experience sampling, which is basically pinging people with regular text messages and asking them how they're feeling, and then can use these real-world measures of emotions to relate them to in-lab neural measures. So clearly technology is helping us research the brain, but how is the brain responding to technology? There's been a lot of mostly negative hype around this issue, often referred to as screen time and how it's ruining all of our lives. And while there have been a few studies that have examined these questions, the truth is that everything we encounter changes our brains. And we just don't have the data right now to say how meaningful these changes actually are. In fact, a recent study examining over 350,000 adolescents found a small but negative association with technology use and well-being, but they also found similar relationships between eating potatoes and wearing eyeglasses and well-being. And yet we don't ask if potatoes and eyeglasses have destroyed a generation. Part of the issue in studying how technology influences our brain is that there are so many different forms of technology that often all get lumped into one category. So how we use technology, what specific technology we use, and what we use it for will be important variables to define in future research. And even as we do more and better research on these topics, the answer is still likely to be that it's complicated. In a way, we're all part of a massive experiment on how technology is influencing our brains, and there will almost certainly be both positive and negative outcomes. So studies that track individuals' behavioral and brain development over time will be particularly important, like the ABCD, or Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, which is currently following over 10,000 kids for 10 years. And this kind of research will be especially important in helping us to figure out what lasting influences technology has on our brains. And I'm happy to continue to discuss any of these topics during or after the panel. Thank you.
One of my colleagues, some of our students, both undergraduates and graduates, and the one in the middle is a robot. Yes, it's a robot. So what do I do all day? I really have the best job in the world. I get paid to think. So I read and I think about mental processes and human behavior. And from that, I try to learn and observe and teach about what it is that I see. This allows me to share ideas with people by talking to you and by writing. I do a lot of writing. And I'm also interested in making change. I take mentoring students very seriously. And I have created an interdisciplinary course that is 1/3 cognitive neuroscience, 1/3 cognitive psychology, and 1/3 artificial intelligence. Now that might sound scary, but you have to be a freshman or a sophomore at Hunter College to take that course, and it has no prerequisites at all. What it promises to do is change forever the way you see thinking. And we seem to be doing a good job of it. It's being picked up in various schools in the country and actually throughout the world. We're really excited about this course. Okay, it's my job to tell you what AI is, and then I'm going to tell you what machine learning is. That's quite a task. We're going to do it a very simple way. We're going to start with the idea of a computational agent. So a computational agent lives in a perpetual sense, decide, act loop. It senses the world. Based on what's sensed, it decides what action to take, and then it does it. And then it does it all over again. Sense, decide, act, sense, decide, act. We just keep doing that, okay? Desperate for an example? Here you go. Here's one. Recognize it? It's a thermostat. It's a computational agent. It senses the temperature in the room. It decides what to do. Well, it's a thermostat for a heater, so what can it do? It can turn the heater on, or it can turn it off. It's only got two choices, okay? And finally, it acts. It does either turn it on or turn it off. So now you have an example of a computational agent, and hopefully you see that it just has a set of possible things it knows how to do, and it will do them based on what it senses in the world, what it gets from it. Okay. The trouble is that's not very smart. One of you were looking at the thermostat, impressed, scared, or whatever. Okay, let's see if we can make it smarter now. Let's talk about what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence, I'll give you the whole definition and then we'll break it down, is the simulation of intelligent human behavior by a machine. Okay, let's look at the blue words. Start with simulate. Simulate means produce the same result. If I want to simulate a chess player, I want to play chess. Okay? Emulate is different. Emulate means simulate, produce the same results, but use the same process. So if I wanted to emulate a human chess player, the first thing I have to do is build an electrochemical suit, because that's what your brain does. And there's no way we know how to do that yet, or certainly I don't. So we're not going to emulate, we're going to simulate. That's what AI is doing. Let's go to the word human. You'll notice it's in parentheses. That's because if tomorrow something landed in Union Square, and out came all these tiny little green creatures, and they were really much smarter than people, I would stop studying people and I'd pay attention to them, because I'm interested in small. Okay. Finally, behavior. I have no way of knowing exactly what is going on in your mind, and I might argue that you probably don't either. So the only way I'm going to be able to replicate something that I think is intelligent is to replicate the behavior rather than the thoughts. Okay? Simulate intelligent human behavior with a computational agent. Doesn't sound so bad. We're going to do forever the same loop, sense, decide, act. Only now I've got a slightly different thermostat. Some of you may have seen these advertised.
Could you use the microphone, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. Some of you may have seen these advertised. Google bought this company a while ago. What this thermostat does, first of all, you can communicate with it. You don't have to touch it. You can use a smartphone. You can use Wi-Fi. And you can it will reprogram itself automatically based on what it observes about human behavior in the room. When people come and go, whether they're asleep or awake, whether there's anybody there at all. That feels a little bit smarter. To create an intelligent agent, what we have to do first, though, is we have to tell it what our world is like. And the challenges in our world are huge. First of all, the world that we all live in is dynamic. It's changing continually. Second of all, it's uncertain. You have no idea if that subway is actually going to show up, right? So the agent has to cope with that. And finally, the world we live in is filled with billions of agents. We call them people. And they have multiple conflicting goals. And now we're going to set this poor little computational agent in the middle of all this and expect it to deal with all those issues. Now, the reason that people can function in a world like this is because we've been here for a long time. And from the moment we are born, we are learning. We have years of experience about how the world works. Some of that we call common sense. Some of it we call skill. It doesn't much matter what we call it. We have all of that. Computers sense differently from us, and they don't have our real world experience. So we have to figure out how to give it to them. That's called, whoops, go that fast. That's called knowledge representation. To help AI agents We have to represent or describe the way the world is and the way the world works. That's a big task. So when I build agents, what kind of agents do I want to have? I want an agent that can learn. Machine learning tells you about how a computer can change its behavior based on its experience. That's what people do. We want machines to do that. We also want agents that can plan, instead of just sense and decide on one action and then execute the action. We'd really like to think in advance and come up with maybe a sequence of actions about how we're going to do something. That's called planning, and it has to be directed at some kind of goal. And finally, as far as I'm concerned, I want agents that collaborate with me. I don't want to turn them loose by themselves particularly. They're good at some things and I'm good at others. Together we should be a terrific team. And so I want to work with people. I want the agent to work with people. And as part of that, I believe that the agent has to explain and be able to discuss its behavior. Okay, so that means we have some really hard problems to work on. And building intelligent agents requires all of that and more. That's what the docs are for. We're always finding out some more knowledge that we need to put in there. But as we make progress in AI, the hard problems that we have some success on actually become subfields in their own right. And so today you've heard about reasoning and planning and machine learning. There's also computer vision, which is figuring out, having the computer figure out what it's seeing, robotics, and natural language processing, all of which you can ask me about during the question period. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. My name is Karen Palmer and I'm the storyteller from the future, and I've come back to enable you to survive what is to come. I'm here today to talk to you about AI. I'm also here on another very important mission. I'm here to talk to a special section of people in the audience known as C1s. The problem is they don't know they're C1s yet. C1s are young people who believe they can change the world, even when other people all around them tell them it's impossible. You see, these are the people that are going to make a difference in the world, and you're going to use technology to do it. I know because I've seen it with my own eyes in the future, and I'm here today to inspire you to figure out how. So let's start. I'm going to talk to you about Riot. Riot is an emotionally responsive film, a template I brought back from the future, that watches you back. Riot uses artificial intelligence and facial recognition. As you play, as you participate in the film responds, the narrative branches. Depending on if you're calm, the narrative will branch in one direction. If you're fearful, it will branch in another. This is a line-of-sight installation that you step into, and you're surrounded by ambisonic sound, scent, and haze. It affects the participant in a very deep way, and I'm going to show you a quick video demonstrating that.
This is just one room. It's less than 100 square feet. Yet we're able to use sensory and video, lights, the smells, the textures of this and the ground. It all brings you to the world, and you're completely immersed. Even though we're not in a riot. You're in a riot here. Not a riot, in a riot.
Riot oftentimes is destructive to the people who are fighting for justice. Because we were allowed to only do these things inside our other communities, and there's things that we were.
Your hand started going in and out like this, and then your chest popped up. Then the back of your neck just like flickered.
In like machine mode, like I would do anything to achieve my mission and protect my people. Okay, then why don't you see this? That's right, then I can always do that.
So often when I'm doing the Riot experience, the participants are affected very profoundly, as I said. Riot involves different interdisciplinaries from neuroscience to epigenetics to behavioral psychology and the parkour philosophy of moving through fear. What I've created is a reality construct. The film responds to your emotions and makes you aware of how your emotions affect the narrative of the film, and the exact same way makes you conscious of how your emotions affect the narrative of your life. In the world in which we currently reside in, messages, social media, advertising, films, they're constantly influencing us, manipulating us, affecting our emotions. We are receptors of those messages. With the experiences that I create using artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and machine learning, we become the projector of our own reality. And the media around us responds to make us conscious of our subconscious behavior. So we can then reprogram ourselves. Now we're aware of our own limitations, we can change our behavior, change our thoughts, practice on the medium in front of us. We can become aware of our limitations, our subconscious behavior, and our implicit bias. Why have I made these experiences? Because, in case you didn't notice, but I'm sure you did, particularly in America, that we're living in a world of global social unrest. And I feel it's up to us to empower ourselves through artificial intelligence, through tech and storytelling. While in New York recently, I did an AI artist residency at ThoughtWorks with a technology company. And I worked with them to create a neural net and the data set and the artificial intelligence. I'm going to show you a little start clip of the film, and it's going to introduce to you some terminology. And I know some of it may go over your head a little bit, but that's what you're here for. Some of these concepts may be very new to you, don't worry. The more you become familiar with them, the more you're going to understand. The most important thing is that you're part of this conversation.
I'm Angelica Perez, and I'm the lead developer on Riot in the Arts Residency for ThoughtWorks. We are creating a facial expression data set to create a neural net that can predict facial expression emotion. A data set is a collection of data samples that come with classifications. A neural net is a computer algorithm modeled after connections in the human brain, and a neural net learns how to perform a task by analyzing examples of that task and learning to replicate.
What we basically do is with AI is that we create a library of emotions. And then what happens when you watch my film, the library of emotions is registered against yours. And then it determines what your emotion is.
Sadness and happiness. Stage 1 is collecting the data, where we record people watching a series of images. Step 2 is taking the videos we recorded and extracting the still images of the peak facial expressions. And stage 3 is labeling the still images that we extracted with discrete emotions. And then we use those final labeled still images to train.
Okay, so that was just to give you an insight into, as an artist, the level of I've had to go into to really understand the AI. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there are many places you could be right now. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. As you've now seen and heard, we have an amazing panel here. I'm not sure how often you all are at a full female panel, but it's not happened to me before. So,
quite exciting, really quite nice. But the real reason I'm here, no offense, is because I'm super excited for taking questions from students, which kind of gets to the heart of why I'm in journalism in the first place, right? So to get to talk to the community we serve and give folks a chance to ask experts questions. So just to jump right in here, start out, we have, where do we draw the line between humans and machines? Each of you want to take a stab at that? It's one of the questions we have from students. They appear to work.
All right. I think it's obviously a complicated question, but there are certainly aspects of human intelligence that right now differentiate us from machines. So a lot of times the AI that we have is completing some kind of pattern completion or feature detection, and that's certainly something that humans do, but it's not everything that humans do. Babies, when they're born, are endowed with certain, what we call like intuitive physics. So they know if you throw a ball through the air, it's not going to flicker in and out of space, the ball will keep moving. If a cup falls off the table and it has milk in it, they understand that you should try and catch the cup and not catch the milk. So they know the difference between solids and liquids. And they have types of intuitive psychology. So a person sitting across from me has a mental state. They know that and can tell the difference between animate and inanimate. So these are some things that are certainly still being investigated that will be important to endow to some kind of AI in order to make it more human-like. And I'll stop there.
Okay. I would draw the line between human and machines right at the beginning. Sense the environment. People have a variety of sensors. We have eyes and ears and noses and mouths and skin that responds to touch. Computers have zeros and ones. That's all they've got inside. And for the immediate future, that's probably all they're going to have. So their inability to sense the world the way we sense it forces one of two things. Either we have to explain every single thing in the world to the machine in terms of zeros and ones, or we have to help the machine figure out how to translate what it is receiving into the kind of knowledge that we would understand. Take voice, for example. If I speak to a machine, the machine's receiving sound waves, which it has to take those electrical impulses and turn them into zeros and ones. Now, humans take the same sound waves, but we treat them very differently. So there are perceptual devices we've been able to put on machines that people don't have. That's another thing. So machines have infrared. They can use sonar, radar, LiDAR. We don't have any of that. They're also extremely accurate when it comes to computation. They have enormous memories, but not always so easy for them to dredge out just the right memory to make use of it. That'll be good for now.
Yes, a big line. As a creative, as a fellow human, to me, my perspective that I'm coming at it more is about consciousness and spirituality and self-awareness. And even though some of that is actually connected, I think, to memory, there's this big debate in terms of can computers and AIs ever be conscious and aware? I can't foresee that as possible. Although there was part of the question was asking about creativity and storytelling, and I have an example here of an artist, and he creates neuroscientist, which is cameraless photography, and an AI actually created this artwork. So he teaches AIs how to create art, and then they create thousands and thousands of pieces of art, and then he selects the most human-like and he exhibits them. So he's kind of showing that AI is actually possible to be creative through teaching them, and he's saying, you know, maybe they will take over art in the future, which is a very human endeavor. So I'm very aware of people kind of transcending this kind of understanding of what AI can do in terms of creativity, but within myself, I would say there's a lot more to being human than replicating art.
Sure, although I feel like we do do need to point out that the most powerful computer on the planet is still the one between our ears. And we don't understand it really well, but we're starting to pair our brains with machines in the form of neural implants, et cetera. So there's some, maybe for 20 or more rabbit holes we can dive into. But instead, let's go back to questions here. The next one, is AI able to think for itself? Can it have emotion?
I can create a machine that will simulate emotion. I have made something play games that takes risks or is extremely cautious. I have a robot that is very curious, likes to go new places so it can learn about the world it's in. Fear, I guess we could probably calculate something that simulated fear. I keep going back to the word cities. There are lots of things I can simulate. I've often thought, Karen, actually, about whether or not a computer could write poetry that would be very interesting. And I think that it might be writing about feelings, but they might not be the kind you and I would experience because its physical body is different. It might want to talk about its memory, or it might want to talk about its hard drive. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It might be a very interesting project for someone to try.
Interesting. Are you kind of saying that it would be aware of its hard drive as a component of its existence?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
I know I can make it aware of what it does and doesn't know. You can ask it a question and it'll say, I really don't have that knowledge. So already there's a kind of self-awareness there.
We have had a big moment for creativity, at least in the journalism world, in the last few weeks, with the first creative writing sample produced by an AI agent, a good 10 years ahead of what we expected. Give you a chance to weigh in as well.
If we're talking about what AI is AI able to think for itself, and you're kind of bringing into the question to me of bias, and implicit bias, which is something which I've been exploring a lot with my work. So just to make you aware, if you're not, that most people in my research have a sense of bias, and if you're a software developer or programmer, you very well may inherently program that into your creation. And here's an example of just that.
All right, so watch this. Black hand, nothing. Larry, go. Black hand, nothing. Larry, go. Racist, other, cease.
Yes, so what is happening is that the developers who are creating this are programming it based upon themselves, and they're putting their white hand in there, and that's the user experience they're creating. And that is a textbook example of implicit bias. Unfortunately, that isn't the only example out there. Recently, Amazon had to kill off its AI recruitment software AI because it was proven to be biased against women, so it wasn't recruiting any women. And also, there was an AI on Twitter that learned to be racist because of the interactions it was having with people in Twitter. It took it basically less than a day. So AI are very prone to bias. So I kind of created this definition, as well as having artificial intelligence, I call it artificial stupidity, because basically it's thinking based upon our thinking. So it's not thinking for itself, we're thinking for it. And even though these things are quite fun and quite light, that there are some other things which have far more repercussions. That's why Google has said that bias is the real danger when it comes to AI. So in the criminal justice system, there is a software AI called Compass, which has been proven to be biased against people of color. And the sole purpose of Compass is to support a judge in determining the length of a criminal when they're sentencing them. There's a similar software in the UK that's been proven to be bias against poor people. So, you know, the implications here for AI not thinking for itself and us thinking for it are very serious. And that's why it's particularly important for me today to be here talking to a diverse community of people, because it's very important for us to be part of these creations moving forward, because at the moment, thinking for itself.
I'm just going to briefly bring it back to emotion. So emotions are very complex and really difficult to study in the lab, actually. So a lot of times we sort of operationalize it or define it as like gaining reward or losing reward, or obtaining punishment or not obtaining punishment. And that really doesn't capture the full picture of what emotions are actually doing. So of course, in order to have an AI that feels emotion, we have to have better models of them. And there are currently people who are trying to build computational models of emotion, but that's very much in its early stages. So I think we're a long way away from a lot of these technologies, but emotion is definitely a more complicated issue as well. Excellent.
Can I go to artificial stupidity just for a moment?
Yes, I was about to ask.
If you would please. Remember what I said was that we have to give the machine the experience, because the machine doesn't get to select it. So the experience that a learning machine has is going to impact its behavior. And if a machine is subject, for example, Tay, the one you're talking about, Microsoft, that lived on the web for maybe just less than 24 hours. The reason that it learned all those awful words, it was a lot worse than that, was that a bunch of trolls had discovered that Tay was there and spoke only to Tay in the language that they wanted to have her learn. And so Microsoft, by making this, it's sort of like taking your poor vulnerable little infant and sitting it on the sidewalk and walking away. And if you do that, you're letting the world teach it. And because there are people who are bright enough and intent enough, they can teach it all kinds of terrible things.
It's quite a powerful infant now.
Yes, it is quite powerful. Absolutely.
We have a responsibility as a parent.
We have a responsibility to provide these machines with a variety of experience, which is why we have a responsibility to have people of color and people from every walk of life participate in developing. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for everyone. I'm looking for a diverse group to do this development.
Particularly as there's not, that I'm aware of, much policy and regulations or transparencies with a lot of these AIs. Software that goes out.
Definitely not here.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I thought we could do a full hour and a half only on ethics and data, and in order to move us on through some of the questions from students before we run out of time here, let's say we have, how will humans become more dependent on AI in the future? Volunteers?
Well, AI is already becoming really integrated into our day-to-day lives. So I think many of us, I for one, can't navigate without Google Maps at all anymore. And so
We're all augmented now.
right, we all have this dependency in a way on these different technologies, and I think it's sort of evolving as we're able to create smarter AI that can meet different needs. So yeah, I think it's an ever-changing landscape.
Anything else to add? Okay. So, go a few ways here. Let's see. So, how does AI impact how I view the world? You're on the hook for this one.
All right. So AI can definitely impact the way we view the world. Again, first of all, AI has the same biases that humans have, so that's an important thing to consider when interacting with AI. There have been a number of studies in social psychology that are trying to sort of understand the way that we interact with bots and what that will do in terms of our social interactions and our social networks. So there have been a few studies coming out of Yale that have looked at how introducing a bot that makes mistakes and will say, oops, like I made a mistake, can actually help the group come together more and become more efficient in order to sort of compensate for it with this like clumsy but lovable bot. Conversely, they can be playing a game with a lot of different agents, and then there might be a bot that's really selfish and only out to get money and screw everybody over, and that makes the group angrier and worse off also. So I think definitely, depending on how agents are interspersed in our lives, it'll have dramatic impacts on how we interact with other people.
So I'm talking about the AI that I'm creating now to impact the world. Is that I'm creating, developing my Riot project, I'm using AI in there. So my objective is to change people's perception. So I'm working with NYU, their psychology department there, and I'm creating a book. Through their research, they've discovered that they can tell someone's bias by where they look on the screen. So if there's footage of, yeah, exactly right. So if there's footage of police brutality, if you as the viewer, eye tracking is watching the perspective of the person being brutalized, you're empathetic towards them. You're like, oh my God, oh my God. If you're watching from the perception of someone doing the brutalization, then you're empathetic with them. You're looking at, so people are basically looking at different parts of the image. So what I'm going to do with my work is that I'm going to alter people's eye tracking through the film so they take in the whole picture. Because at the moment in the culture that we're living, we're only seeing our own perspective. So that's my objective with my project, is to use AI to shift people's perception. Also, I want to make people aware of the reality of the world coming that I envisage. So I envisage that in the future, at the moment, with driverless cars like Ubers, people's main concern is safety. However, in the future, which I envisage I'm going to be putting in my work, is that the main issue with things like driverless cars is security. So if you were to call a driverless car like an Uber, and you have any outstanding driving offences or traffic violations against you, when that car comes, and it scans who you are, and you get into that vehicle, you won't be transported to the party to meet your friend or your desired destination. You'll be taken to the closest police station for processing, because that vehicle will be turned into a temporary police transportation device. So what I'm trying to do is make people aware of the potential realities using AI and the concept of AI in the work that I'm doing.
Okay, as long as you have a car. There's an old problem in philosophy. It's called the trolley problem, which is that it's that long ago. For those of you who don't know what a trolley is, think of a bus that's run by electricity. The driver of the trolley has a choice, a very sudden choice that she has to make, either to direct the bus, which is empty, into a wall, or to hit 3 people standing in front of the trolley. And the question is, which one do you do? Now, if you're building an automated car that is going to drive you around, you might want to ask, which algorithm is it running? Is it hitting the wall and killing you? Or is it hitting people? There are more of them. It's actually forcing you to confront philosophical decisions that you might not be aware of ever having to make. But in the course of doing that, it's going to send you back to really thinking about your values. And I think that's a really important thing. Values are cultural. They're going to be determined by country and age. They're going to be determined by your life experience, your attachments to people in the world. And all of this is going to be subject to a button you push that says, I choose this one on screen.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I can't remember the exact car show, but there was a moment where this question came up at the car show: what will my car do if it's faced with either killing me or killing these several pedestrians? And the programmers used the principle of maximum utility, so they wanted to save as many people as possible. And people got angry because they're like, my car's gonna kill me? Like, that's really messed up. So I think it does really go back to these values and us sort of grappling with what kind of values we're going to give
that it's probably an unanswerable question because we see increasingly in our political bodies that we can't come to a decision about what it is we all value. And so we're going to have to figure out ways to go about this. In the European Union, what they did quite recently was pass a law that says that if an algorithm makes a decision that impacts a human being's life or well-being, that that algorithm must be capable of explaining that decision in a way that the person can understand. I vote for that. I think that's a terrific start. I think we have a long way to go.
Yes, while also at the same time beginning to use these algorithms in all manner of places, by the way, from policing to social services, increasingly in hiring. So explainable AI maybe is a good reason for us to all get back together again another night. Let's see, what do we have here? Why does natural language processing mess up all the time? And this is directly to Susan.
Yeah, I have to get to my slides to do that.
For sure. And the mouse on this is not working for me, so I have to try it. Computer's working, another mouse was
Yes, again, try to get out. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. Good. So to work with an agent, an intelligent agent, you have to communicate. That's what people want to do, right? We have to talk to it, or we'd like it to talk back. A natural language is a language that people normally use to communicate. It's been developed by groups of people.
Susan, sorry, do you have to print the microphone?
Yeah, it's been developed by groups of people who have commonality. And that's, so an example of a natural language would be English or Chinese or Arabic. Those are all perfectly fine natural languages. As opposed to an artificial language, like a programming language or a logical language. So now you know what natural language is. What do we want a machine to do with it? The first thing we want it to do is understand. So we want, if we're speaking to it, that it should be able to hear us. That is, translate the sounds into text. If it's reading, we want it to understand what it's reading. We want it to be able to go out and find more text to try and deepen its understanding. That's one job. Another thing we'd like to do is we'd like the machine to generate. We don't want this to be a one-way street. We want it to tell us All right. So we want it to be able to speak to us, and we'd like it to be able to write. And finally, let's get a little more ambitious and say that we'd like it to be able to modify natural language. That is, we'd like it to be able to read a book and then write a book report, or translate something to another natural language. Now, why is this hard? I've brought you 2 headlines.
You should invite some of the students up here to help us.
Okay, everybody understand those headlines? They're 2 separate headlines. They should come up one at a time, but they refuse to do that. Okay. Sorry. But the issue here is ambiguity. And language is inherently ambiguous. There are a lot of reasons that language is ambiguous. One is the way it's spelled. We have words that are spelled differently, mean different things, but sound the same. Another is semantics. What does the word mean? If you say dish, you're talking about a plate or something you cooked in a restaurant. Lexical. This has got to do with the word, my best example for this is the word can. So a can could be a soda can, or it could be the process of preserving vegetables in a tin, or it might just be a way of saying that you're able to do something. And then there's a structural thing. Look at this sentence. Who's got the telescope? The person, or the person that's being observed, or the person who's speaking? And here's another one. I made her duck. Does that mean I cooked, or I threw something at her head? Okay, and one more. My favorite metaphor. All the world's a stage. Now, the world is not a stage, it's a planet. We know that, right? It's got all kinds of things on it. It's not a stage at all. Now, again, we go back to this idea that you have all this experience, and what we require is context and knowledge to understand each other when we speak. But instead, NLP has tried 2 different things. For about 30 years, what we tried to do was rule-based methods. We make all these tiny little rules. They were very precise, they were really accurate, but there were so many of them. And after a while, everybody just sort of threw up their hands and said, this is just not going to work. And so, around 1990 or so, they started doing something else, which was taking large bodies of text and processing. Now, when I'm talking about large bodies of text, I'm talking about trillions of words. So if you're a computer and somebody feeds you trillions of sentences, and no sentence has ever had the word avocado and swim in the same sentence, and someone asks you if avocados swim, you're going to say probably not, right? So now you get these broad, sweeping generalizations, but they're fairly shallow. And what NLP needs is it needs both the depth and the breadth. And we don't know how to do that yet, so please come and help us figure it out.
Why do companies, rather, what do companies do with my data, and can it be used in a harmful way beyond advertising? Karen, you wanna?
So, you guys are aware of the Chinese credit system that they're going to introduce in 2020, and they're kind of doing a soft launch at the moment. So this is the extreme of how people can use data. So for those of you who don't know, the Chinese government have created a system where they monitor their citizens. And bad behavior could be putting something anti-government or detrimental to the government on social media. It could be loitering. It could be standing by a gate at an airport. It could be driving at a pedestrian crossing when you're supposed to stop. And basically, the repercussions to today is that 23 million people have been limited from traveling as part of this system. There are other issues as well where people have been, you can be limited in your employment because if you will not be promoted in certain jobs because you're not deemed trustworthy, so you're not deemed management material. Even your dog can be taken away from you if you're not having it on a lead in public. So this is a very serious example of how your data can be used to directly affect your life. And the name of this system is called Skynet. And for those of you who are probably a little old school or into science fiction, you might remember that from the Terminator films as a software system that was going to take over the world. So yeah, it doesn't look too good at the moment.
The most extreme version actually that we covered is this. In public restrooms in China, facial ID can see how much toilet paper you're taking. And so if you take too much toilet paper, that's not good.
No.
You don't want to cross the street without a crosswalk. Well, I mean, because it's in a central location, not in a stall, I believe. Just saying, there's a lot to watch in this space. And I feel kind of bad, I keep rushing this on through.
Can I just say one more thing quickly on this topic? So companies are collecting a lot of data about us, and I don't know the details of most of it. However, we know that they have it. They have data from our phones, they have data from our computers, all the devices that we're using. And it would be really helpful if they could share these data more with scientists so we can use them in, for example, the ABCD longitudinal study I was mentioning before to get at more specific metrics. So now Apple recently put this screen time update function so we can see every week how much screen time we're actually using. So data like that, which is currently not available to researchers, could potentially be really helpful in actually figuring out how is AI affecting us and our brains.
Now, let's see. So we have. We have more questions from the audience because I have a few up here. So.
When it comes to technology and the government and corporations, things like the internet and email, they had for decades, particularly the military, decades before it came to us, the people. With AI, the consequences of us not being involved at the beginning to me are catastrophic, particularly for working class people, for minorities, people of colour. And as you see, women, if you're trying to get a job at Amazon. So for me, my kind of real passion is to democratize AI, to make sure that we, the people, have access to this software very early on. We're super tech-savvy people, and there's much of us that can utilize this and use this same software to empower us and our communities. I actually released, oh, it's not up there, but I released, you can go to our website afterwards, and karenpalmer.uk, and it has information about how, as part of my residency, I released AI as an open source. Because it's very important for me to develop these tools and then give them back to us, the people, so that we can be not just a part of this conversation, but a part of this world, this technological world that we're moving into.
Yeah. And if anybody, not to promote my own show here, but I work for the Wall Street Journal, and we have a podcast that I host. It's called The Future of Everything. And if you're looking for a high-level explainer in under 15, 18 minutes usually on some of the things we're talking about, anything from bias or algorithms used, for example, for dating and what it means to turn over some of these decisions.
Highly recommend.
Thank you. Smart cities is another one that I started thinking about. It was one we did in Vegas where trash cans that can smell what's inside, for example, and know whether they need to be emptied and kind of where that can go or not and what it means, really. All right, so looking to some questions we have from the audience. Is it possible for AI to attack people or have a revolution, just like in a sci-fi film?
I called that.
Only like to screen down. I called this one before we started. I said somebody's going to ask me if the killer robots are going to come murder them while they take their jobs. But nobody asked about jobs. They just asked about danger.
We don't know yet. Could be.
Could be both. Okay.
No, but there could be jobs.
Oh, could be jobs too. All right, so we'll do jobs too. There was an industrial revolution before this one. There were lots of revolutions. You heard about those at the beginning. People didn't lose work, or they did lose work, but they found new jobs. I actually think that the jobs that we will be left with will be far more creative. They will be far more interesting. And they will require more training. I think that nothing is going to come and get us unless we let it. And so go back to that story about the trolley and think carefully about the fact that it is everyone's responsibility to talk about what it is we want. Collaboration is what I believe in. I don't believe that the robots are, or whatever you'd like to have it be, the robot is just an embodiment computer. It just moves, that's all. I don't believe that they are capable at this point of doing the kinds of things that most of us fear. It's one thing to put things in a box on an assembly line. It's another thing to diagnose a child with disease. But we're getting better at doing many things, and the question is, how do we prevent mistakes? Mistakes will be inevitable, we can minimize them. How do we deal with those mistakes? There are all these ideas that come from science fiction that are just not right. I just read a paper the other day about getting robots to say no to a command and how useful that could be. And I had never thought of that before, but I invite you to think about it now. You and a robot are carrying something together and you're walking backwards. And you say to the robot, come forward a foot, and there's a hole behind you. You want the robot to say no. There are a lot of situations where you want an intelligence assistant to say no. So we have to take responsibility for that. We can't make these broad sweeping rules that just say, do everything I say to you and don't violate the command.
Just to sort of piggyback a little bit, oh, I just lost my train of thought, which ones I'm going to address. I had thoughts for both of these, but in terms of the robot army that isn't coming to get us yet, a more proximal concern might actually be in terms of neuroprosthetics. So neuroprosthetics are starting to become a thing, and that's basically, for example, a prosthetic limb that we can control with our mind. And we're actually making a lot of progress on these fronts, but that raises a ton of ethical issues, right? If the prosthetic does something like, for example, crush someone's hand, is it that person's fault? Is it the machine's fault? Who is going to get sued in that situation, right? So that, I think, is a concern we're going to have to deal with in the nearer term than the robot army. And then also, just to piggyback on the job front, the original computers were people and women, actually. So if you haven't read or watched Hidden Figures, I highly recommend it. But in that movie, they struggle with exactly this, right? They have these computers, they see that they're taking over their jobs, and so they learn how to work the computers in order to make themselves useful again and to have a job and to not get laid off for it. So I think it's going to be an evolving issue and an important one.
And that's a much better job that they wound up with. It was challenging, it was exciting, it was much more fun.
So just to add to what you both said as well, that there's this concept that being talked about called humans in the loop, where humans work together with AI, which I feel personally more comfortable with. And also, if you look at other industries, like, I don't know if you're aware that airplanes, then they have pilots in the plane, but the plane is largely run on autopilot. But they don't say, oh, let's just get rid of the pilots, we don't really need them, the plane's doing most of the work. They stay there, they monitor the AI, they work together with it. The pilots mostly take off and land, and they're there if need be. So I would be much more comfortable with this kind of humans in the loop.
And that's the law for defense systems in this country. It's not, though, in other parts of the world, and that's for its own other conversation. But jumping back quickly to neural implants, a couple of the more interesting interviews that I've done over the last year is you start to think about, well, for now, we're using implants to help people. But in the long run, we could be making superhuman people. And then what does that mean for competition for jobs? And who has access to that? But to back up, so there was a woman who was having so many seizures per day. You may all be familiar with her. She's now a volunteer at Presbyterian Hospital in the ER. But at a point, maybe 5 years ago, she was bedridden and considering doctor-assisted suicide because her parents had to completely care for her. She was having hundreds of seizures a day. She couldn't remember more than 15 or 20 minutes at a time. And now, thanks to an implant, which has the ability to send and receive, so it can both respond to and prevent these seizures, she is now dedicating her life to service, volunteering here in New York City. There are so many different ethical questions. Like, whereas I think probably a lot of people feel pretty comfortable with this idea of someone who is disabled or harmed being helped, but then what does it mean for a class of people to have access to perfect memory? And what does it mean for relationships between countries and militaries and all of these other things as we go down that rabbit hole? So Sarah and Mary have sent us a signed question here, which I'm delighted by because I love that you know what it is, but it's beyond the scope of our panel right now. It says, what are some moral ethical issues behind human gene editing? And we'll direct you, if you're in the audience still, we'll direct you back to a Designer Babies episode we did, and happy to see you in the link. Some of these things are beginning to happen with embryos, even here, or at least selection and the next step. We have more, excellent. If anybody would like to come up to a microphone and talk directly with us, that would be really, really nice too.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. Is that us, or did somebody buy a microphone? Oh, never mind. There's someone found a microphone. All right, would you pardon me as I try to read cursive. Would you consider, I mean, I'm delighted that somebody here is writing in cursive, but they don't teach that anymore. Oh, great. Terrific. You step up to a microphone.
Is it on? Oh, there it is. I was curious about if you think that personality can be processed with data and replicated in AI. Like, do you think that you could not necessarily make an original personality but replicate someone else's? Do you think that you could, like, how intimately do you think you could replicate emotion? And do you think this would be necessarily a good thing for you know, to do and give AI that ability? Do you think that'd be beneficial in some way, or do you think it could be some way detrimental?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to the emotion issue a little bit before. I guess your question in terms of replicating someone's personality, I don't know if we had sufficient data on that individual to train a machine. Could we replicate?
Somebody in the 1950s who was actually a psychiatrist, from a program called Harry. Do you know about that? Harry was intended to be paranoid schizophrenic. And the question was whether or not a human psychiatrist could tell whether Harry was a human or a machine, but in the context of paranoid schizophrenia. And Harry was very successful, fooled everybody. So but that's a fairly easy one to replicate. The nuances of personality are outside my knowledge.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of whether that's good or bad, it sort of depends on what you're using it for, right? If you're using it to help train psychiatrists, it might be a great tool. However, if you're using it to catfish somebody on the internet, it might not be as good of a tool. So intention is big with all of these things.
Yeah, now, I didn't mean to imply, if I did, that there is human gene or human inputs being gene edited here in New York. No, we are taking steps towards designer babies, just to be clear in case not. Let's see. Want to step up to the microphone? Hi. You might need to hit a button to turn it on. Is this on? Okay, great. Okay. Hi, my name is Heejin Yim. I'm just curious that it's really exciting to have 3 women and moderators, women. But I was wondering if you could, each of the panelists could talk about who were your mentors, who got you interested in studying neuroscience and computer science and AI?
So my original mentors actually in undergrad and when I was getting ready to apply to grad school were all males, and I don't know if I explicitly did this or if it was an implicit thing, but all of my mentors since then have been females. So all of the principal investigators who I've worked with, all the people who have been really influential in sort of shaping my thinking and my career direction have all been women, and they've often come to prominence in their field in a time when women weren't really super well represented. And it's still the case that women aren't very represented as principal investigators of labs and sciences, but we're working on it. So I think I've been very fortunate to have a lot of women mentors.
I'm old enough so that computer was not a discipline when I went to college. I was a mathematician. I trained as a mathematician both at undergraduate and at NYU, actually, as a graduate student. And then something amazing happened, which was that I had male mentors, because there was absolutely no women at all in the field, who encouraged me to try hard problems, things I had always been interested in, no idea how to do, but nobody else did either. And so I got really lucky. All you need is somebody who's receptive and believes in you, of any gender.
My background is that I'm an artist and a filmmaker. So I kind of started working with technology about 15 years ago because I realized that, in my opinion, that was going to be a big part of communicating, particularly with young people, through art and creativity. So in that 15-year journey, I've mostly worked with, now thinking about it, men, old men, or younger men. In terms of general mentors, my parents have been like a big support network for me. When I worked in New York last year and I did their AI artist residency, it happened that I started to work with a team of just full women. It's just women working on the team. And I think that reflects, to me, the shift in the time, what's happening, and also the location. Because in London as well, that probably wouldn't happen. So this was the first time, like last year, that I worked with any women technologists. So there needs to be more chicks instead.
All right, so we have a question here. What are the other panelists' opinions and thoughts on Riot? Yes. Yes.
whether I've lost it.
I know this is a completely fair question. Do you have thoughts you're able to share on that?
It seems interesting. This was my first exposure to it, so I don't think I have enough of a sense to comment about it, but it definitely looked like people had a very emotional, intense experience. So,
Really interesting to me too.
What efforts are being made to bring AI into public schools, and how do we ensure we expose children to theories which will eventually change the world? When I read this at first, I was thinking, oh, right, like the facial ID, we've talked about bringing it to schools, but this is a question that's completely different. It's talking about education.
I can't answer that question, I have no knowledge, but my opinion is that I've been talking about AI for the last couple of years on like an international stage to my colleagues and my peers. And this year I feel it's really important to bring that conversation to young people because they tend not to be part of this conversation. It doesn't seem to draw a lot of them naturally, like say music or media or entertainment. So I feel I'm here today to try and attract more young people into this conversation.
I am super excited to see this many people with the microphones. So you called it a few in this direction.
I just wanted to find out, since we're moving towards a place where gender doesn't matter, how is AI going to differentiate a man from a woman? And will procreation be anywhere part of that? Because eventually everything's going to turn.
So I think the question was about how AI can tell men and women apart and how that will affect procreation. I don't really have any thoughts on that.
They learn, if they're looking at faces, they learn from the data set that they're given, which is why, for example, they're so bad at recognizing people of color because the data sets were not properly formulated. I would believe they do gender identification by face. I don't know that it's necessary for them to do that at all. I think, again, you have to tell the computational agent what you want, rather than let it decide for you.
So we have 2:20 in line, and I'm told we have to wrap up, but I don't like wrapping up before we get to all these questions. So maybe after we're done, if you're willing to come up and speak to us directly. You come first.
Okay, so just quickly to bring back the thought before we completely go away from it, I just thought due to the fact that we already brought up that it is possibly possible that artificial intelligence would overtake the world, and people already got that idea. And just to bring back the thought, I thought that what would we do to the technology that would continue to get worse, take over people? Would we take into our own hands and go for stopping it, destroying it, or would we attempt to keep it intact because it is advanced, but find some kind of other way to stop it?
All right, here, put this one to bed. They all run on electricity. If it comes to that, I'll just unplug everything. And there are a lot of other people who do that already. I'll take it off the web while we're at it.
All right, I saw there. Yes, great.
Okay, we touched on inherent bias of machines before, so sorry.
Yeah, maybe close to it. There we go.
Yeah, okay, so you touched on inherent bias in machines previously. So as AI becomes more influential in our society, do you think there's going to be a specific system of checks or some kind of regulations placed on that to make sure that that bias is regulated effectively?
Okay. At the moment, a lot of these data sets that are created are not transparent, and there's no policy that I'm aware of regulations. So that, and they're created often by private organizations. So that's why the Compass system, which is to support judges, is actually developed by a private commercial company and sold to the system, and then they just use it. Nobody knows what the data set is. So at the moment, there's nothing to check this. People just buy them and use them. And that's why it's very important for having more diversity involved, and for also for people like us, the people, to also create our systems, because at the moment there isn't one. So say if they started to think about creating policy and regulation today, that might take 2 or 3 years to be implemented. So yeah, I don't think I expect that to come in at some time, but then who's going to create the regulation? Who's going to create the policies? Maybe they haven't got my interests at heart. That's my answer.
It's a super complicated issue with a lot of great conversation, and a whole conference is hosted on this at this point, so there's a lot to dig into there. Thank you all very much. Again, there's so many different places you could have chosen to spend this evening, and you're here with us, so we appreciate it. Thank you. Come forward. Thank you, everyone.